Salam alaikum. Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Nice to see all of you. Welcome, Don. Welcome to a special guest presentation with Don Carveth on the topic of transference. This evening's event is organized through the Pakistan Psychoanalytic Circle. We have regular programming, including small study circles, reading groups, lectures, and conferences, which are posted to www.psychoanalysispakistan.com. Today's event involves a special lecture, after which we will open it up for a few questions or perhaps a discussion. And then we will end promptly at 8:30 p.m. Pakistan time. I'd like to turn it over now to one of our engaged participants in our circle, namely Mohammed Abdullah Ali, who will provide Donald's introduction and I believe facilitate the discussion. Abdullah, please.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. I hope you are doing great. Am I audible?
Yep.
All right. So, uh, I would like to introduce Dr. Don Carveth. He's an emeritus professor of sociology and social and political thought at York University in Toronto. He's a training and supervising analyst in the Canadian Institute of Psychoanalysis, a past director of the Toronto Institute, and past editor-in-chief of the Canadian Journal of Psychoanalysis. He's the author of the Still Small Voice, Psychoanalytic Reflections on Guilt and Conscience, published by Carnot, 2013, and my favorite, Psychoanalytic Thinking, a Dialectical Critique of Contemporary Theory and Practice, uh, which was published by Routledge, 2018, and his recent book, Guilt, A Contemporary Introduction, which was also published by Routledge in 2023. Many of his publications are available on his York website, that is yorku.ca slash dcarveth. And his current website, doncarveth.com. And his video lectures are available on his YouTube channel, youtube.com slash Don Carveth. He is in private practice in psychoanalysis in Toronto. Move on to Dr. Don.
Are we ready to begin? Shall I begin?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Nice to see everyone. Hello, Dwayne. My vision is very impaired. Can you wave your hand, Dwayne, so I can see you? Oh, there you are. I see. Okay. Okay. Oh, there you are. Gotcha. Okay. So uh, this is a topic, transference. I could go on and on forever about this. Um, I prefer a dialogue with people, so I invite you to ask any questions or points that you want to discuss, even as we go along. I hope we can do that instead of having to wait to the end for everything. Um, okay, I thought I would begin with a clinical vignette in order to bring things down to earth so that we don't get lost in intellectual abstractions. So, first of all, let's distinguish between transference and projection. They are often confused. So, a patient comes into my office, a young man. He's convinced for some reason that I'm angry. And just for the sake of this vignette, let's assume I am not angry. But he comes in with the idea that I am angry. Okay, here we can distinguish transference and projection. If it's transference, that's because he is displacing an image of some angry person from his past, like his angry father. He's displacing, not projecting. He's displacing the image of his father in the past onto me in the present. This is transference. He is transferring the image of a past person onto a person in the present. And in this particular illustration, there's a lot of distortion in this. Okay, because for the sake of this illustration, the truth is I'm not angry. And notice that he is not angry in this illustration. He's not angry, I'm not angry, but he's seeing me as angry because he's got me mixed up with his father, his angry father from the past. So there's distortion here. And of course, that is Freud's view of transference. It involves distortion. There's going to be much more to say about this. Let's immediately contrast this situation with projection. If it's not transference, but if what is at work in this man is projection, the truth then is that he's not talking about his father. He's not displacing a father image from the past. Again, I'm not angry, but he's seeing me as angry. It's not transference, it's projection, which means he's angry. Probably unconsciously. He is repressing his anger. He doesn't want to know he's angry. He's seeing his anger in me. And again, distortion is involved. I'm not angry in this example. He sees me as angry because he's angry, but he doesn't know he's angry. He does not want to know he's angry. So he's sticking that onto me. Okay, let's take a third step. We've moved from transference to projection. Let's move now to a Melanie Klein concept, projective identification, of which there are two types. The first type we don't need to talk about because it's basically just projection. The second type is interpersonal projective identification. This guy who's angry and doesn't want to know he's angry, he's seeing his anger in me. That is projective identification type 1. Namely, he just has the fantasy that I'm angry. In projective identification type 2, he goes beyond having the fantasy that I'm angry. He behaves in subtle ways to make me angry. It becomes an interpersonal process. And here's how he does it. As he comes in, on his way to the couch to lie down, because I'm seeing him 4 times a week in analysis. So he comes in, he passes my chair, he kind of glances at me sidelong as he passes my chair, and he says, "Wrong side of the bed?" What? Wrong side of the bed? Did you get out of the wrong side of the bed? I mean, you're obviously grumpy today. I haven't said a word to him. As he passes me, wrong side of the bed, you're obviously grumpy. What? He said, "Look how defensive you're being already," he says to me. "You're obviously being defensive. Guess what's happening? Guess what I'm feeling? I'm starting to feel angry. This idiot it thinks he knows my mind better than I do. He walks into my house. I haven't said a word. He says, wrong side of the bed, but you're obviously angry. Well, this is pissing me off. This is projective identification type 2. He's not only just seeing what in fact is his anger in me, he's not only seeing his anger in me, he's making me angry. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling process. This, by the way, is Wilfred Bion. Projective identification type 1 is Melanie Klein. Bion takes a step beyond Klein. In Klein, it's just his fantasy that I'm angry. In Bion, he goes beyond that and actually, in subtle ways, makes me angry. Okay, we've distinguished transference from projection, and we've also distinguished projection from projective identification. These are three different processes. And it's very important to be able to distinguish them. Is he displacing a figure from his past? Is this about his father? See, that's also metaphor. If in the transference I become his metaphorical angry father, metaphor is also involves a transfer from one object to another, just as he's transferring his image of his father onto me. I become his metaphorically, I become his angry father in his mind. Okay, but the purpose of today's talk is to focus on transference. I've gone from transference to projection and then to projective identification. Let's bring it back to transference. Okay, there are many types of transference. There is positive transference, the transfer of positive feelings from a positively liked or loved person from the past is being transferred onto someone in the present. This is ubiquitous. Transference is present not just in analysis, it's everywhere. You guys are having transferences to me now. All human relationships involve some element of transference. If it's good feelings, these good feelings are being transferred from someone liked or loved in the past onto someone in the present. Negative transference is the transference of negative feelings from a hated person or a disliked person in the past onto someone in the present. And then, of course, there's ambivalent transference, where both love and hate from a past person is being transferred onto someone in the present. So positive, negative, ambivalent. In psychoanalytic discourse, ambivalence is generally pretty celebrated. It's the alternative to splitting, right? Splitting is seeing something either as all good or as all bad. And that's characteristic of more borderline spectrum people, as opposed to neurotics. Neurotics don't, well, they do split. Everyone splits from time to time, but neurotics split a lot less. The neurotics are more evolved precisely because they can hold ambivalence. They can see both sides. We live in a world which is increasingly unable to see both sides. Everything is so polarized today. It's as if our whole civilization has become borderline. Splitting is everywhere. But sometimes you encounter people, thank God, some of them still exist, who strive to see both sides. Of course, this is what it is to be reasonable. This is what it is to be a rational person. is to not succumb to splitting, not succumb to either complete idealization or complete devaluation. It's easy for me to say this, but as soon as you raise the subject of Donald Trump, I begin to split immediately. Anyway, okay. Positive, negative, ambivalence. And then, of course, there are different transferences on the basis of who is the person who's being transferred. There are mother transferences. They did a little in TV Ontario here, wanted to do a little documentary on a psychoanalyst, and I foolishly agreed. And so they made a little film of me, my life, my childhood. They went back and got pictures from my childhood and everything. And at the end of the documentary, they put up a picture of my mother in her early 40s, I think, and a picture of my wife. And they had them side by side, and you could see that it was hard to distinguish. And then they overlapped the pictures, and you could see it's basically the same woman. I married my mother, but I'm not guilty of incest because she's not my mother, but she sure looks like her. Okay, that's a mother transference. I have a major mother transference towards my wife, which makes for a good marriage, because if you believe Freud, his whole theory of the Oedipus complex, the mother is the first woman. The mother is the first object of desire, usually. Well, I should say the mothering one. You could be mothered by a man. You could be mothered by your father. But it's the first, the so-called the primary object. Well, certainly, I'm a great believer in the Oedipus complex, because I married someone who is the spitting image of my mother. Which in this case made for a good marriage. Every little boy wants to go to bed with his mother. Most little boys are unconscious of this. Some are conscious. Some are quite conscious of their sexual feelings towards their mother. I was. And I get to go to bed with her because I picked a woman who looks just like my mother. That's a big transference. Fortunately, she's fairly sane, and I, after years of analysis, have become fairly sane. I know she's not my mother. I don't suffer from a whole lot of guilt for going to bed with my mother because she's not my mother. But she kind of is on a certain level of fantasy. That's a mother transference. Then there are all of the father transferences, all of these male patients I've had down through the years who they can't keep a job. That was true of my father. My father dropped out of school after primary school. He tried to hold jobs here and there, but he was always getting fired because he couldn't stand male authority. When the boss would try to boss him, my father would, well, he worked in a grocery store, and he had a smock full of eggs that he was putting away, and the boss said something to him that my father didn't like, and he just unloaded the eggs at the boss. Got fired. This kept happening to him. So he decided, well, I have to be my own boss. I can't seem to keep a job. So he did not have a high school education. So he became a barber. He went to barber college and became a barber. And for some years, in his early 20s, he was cutting hair. But he was very smart and ambitious. He decided he wanted to be a physician, but he didn't have high school. So he went back to Oakwood Collegiate here in Toronto, and they fast-tracked him through high school. And he applied to the U of T Medical School, and he got accepted. And the Depression was happening. Anyway, he got through medical school. because he had to be his own boss because he had conflict with authority. So I have patient after patient, who get into trouble occupationally because they can't stand having any authority over them. It's a negative father transference. Every authority, okay, intellectually, there's a big distinction between authority, legitimate authority, and authoritarianism. Like my dad, I'm anti-authoritarian. But I've had to learn how to distinguish between illegitimate authority and legitimate authority. I mean, we need legitimate authority. We need direction. We need rules. We need the law. We can't go rebelling against all authority, but it's perfectly necessary to rebel against illegitimate authority. But neurotic people have a hard time making such distinctions as between legitimate authority and authoritarianism. Every boss is a Nazi. That's stupid. That doesn't get you far. Because of a negative transference of your authoritarian father onto everybody in authority. That's neurosis. So in the analysis, you sort that out. You realize that you're seeing everybody as authoritarian. You're finding your authoritarian father everywhere. You're finding him where he doesn't exist. You're keeping your struggle with your authoritarian dad alive. You're reliving it with every job you take. That's neurotic. Okay. Mother transfer. Oh, and then, of course, siblings. Now, Freud knew about siblings. He knew about sibling rivalry. Kind of indirectly, he knew a little bit about Cain and Abel, although he would never draw or seldom draw on a biblical source. He hated religion, but he knew about it. But having said a few things about it, he played it down. And his followers, for decades, played the significance of the sibling transference down. We weren't thinking about it. Psychoanalysis came to be all about parent-child, mother-child, father-child. But we kind of forgot about the siblings. A few people here and there tried to remind us. Finally, Juliet Mitchell, a Kleinian analyst, wrote a book called Siblings to remind us about the importance of sibling transferences. In that book, she says, where there are siblings, murder is in the air. Where there are siblings, murder is in the air. They want to kill each other. They also love each other, but they often want to kill each other. Every once in a while they do. Just the other day in Toronto, we had a sibling murder. An older brother murdered his younger brother. It's a wonder it doesn't happen more. So in analysis, we don't just get patients who come with mother transferences or father transferences. I've had patients in whom mother-father played very little role in the whole analysis. The whole analysis focused on his damn older brother. This guy had an older brother who was just extremely talented. So a track meet would be coming up, and my patient for weeks would be training, would be running, would be jumping, getting ready for the meet. And the brother was not doing any training at all, but the day of the track meet, the brother shows up and wins every ribbon. My patient was struggling for months to learn how to play the trumpet. And one day, he leaves the trumpet lying on the sofa or something, and the brother wanders in and picks it up. What's this? How do you do? 10 minutes later, the brother is playing the trumpet like Harry James. He just was extremely good at whatever he tried to do, this brother. And my patient hated him with a passion. And early in my work with this man, I knew that I have to be very careful not to act like the smart-ass know-it-all brother. I knew that if that transference of the older brother onto me, if that happened, the therapy would be impossible. So I was very careful. And then one day he came and he told me that he'd rented a movie. I don't know whether you know it, Shawshank Redemption. It's one of my favorite movies. It's a Christian movie. It's a Christian allegory. Anyway, he saw the movie and he was devaluing it. He said, what a rotten movie, he said. I said, why? What? He said, well, the good guy works away and he digs his tunnel and he escapes. He goes down the shit pipe and he gets to the Gulf of Mexico and he gets a boat and he's free. But his friend, played by Morgan Freeman, is left in prison, sitting around with the other prisoners, talking about what a great guy this was, the one who escaped. Lousy ending, he said. Now, here's where I made a huge mistake. If the patient is talking about a film that you've seen, keep your mouth shut. Don't let the patient know that you saw the film. Well, I made the mistake. I said, but the film didn't end that way. I said, you turned it off too soon. He didn't believe me. He went and re-rented the cassette. And then he came the next week and he said, well, you were right, you son of a bitch. And the analysis ends today. He storms out and slams the door. I became the hated, wise ass older brother. Brother who's always right. I thought it was a great teaching moment. You see, I was going to show him how he clutches defeat from the jaws of victory. What a perfect opportunity to make an interpretation, because he does that all over the place. I thought, here I can really show him. I completely forgot about the brother transference. I called him, I wrote him, he never came back. He was gone. I think in going, he was protecting me. But he wanted to kill his brother. And a couple of times when he got up off the couch, he had to pass me on the way out of the office. And he told me that on more than one occasion, as he passed me, he had the thought, I could take him. I could beat him up. I could. During the Canadian football, we have the Grey Cup, and it's often in Toronto. And whenever the Grey Cup was in Toronto, there are big celebrations at the Royal York Hotel downtown, and he would be down there as part of the Grey Cup celebrations. He would invariably get into a fist fight with someone in the bar. This guy did not have good control of his violent impulses. So I think by ending the analysis that way, he was protecting me to some degree from himself. Okay, that's the sibling transference. Okay. Okay, I've said that for Freud, transference involves distortion. But critics have pointed out that transferences don't just contain distortion. Sometimes there's an element of justification for the transference And we have to acknowledge it. Now, I would say that in neurotic transferences, there is distortion, but it's not extreme. In other words, the neurotic needs to find a hook to hang the transference on. So if the neurotic is having, say, a father transference to me, I have to, in discussing his transference with him, I have to, my attitude has to be, you're not just distorting by seeing me as your father when I'm not your father. There is distortion, but I have to acknowledge that I'm a little like your father. There's truth in your transference, your father transference to me. I'm certainly not identical to your father. I've never beaten you with a belt. I've never beaten you with anything, although sometimes my words may feel like a beating to you, and there's quite a bit of distortion in that, because I'm not even beating you, but I can be a bit authoritarian, I have to admit, when things get heated. And now, you see, if he were borderline or psychotic, the transference would be highly distorted, right? But he's neurotic. So being neurotic, he's able to hold on to the element of as if. He knows I'm not his father. But as we analyze the father transference, we have to be honest, and we have to admit that it's not completely fabricated. Usually with neurotics, the transference is a little bit justified by the nature of the object who's being transferred on. They have to find a hook. The truth is that even psychotics find a hook. Even in psychosis, there's some hook that the transference is hung on. So some transferences are highly distorted, and some are minimally distorted. Okay, it's not all. And the truth must be told, you know. But Kernberg makes this point. Patient sees me as authoritarian, and we're talking about this, and I have to acknowledge that in this context of the debate that we are discussing, that we had and so on, I can see how maybe I was, or I could be seen as a little authoritarian in the way that I had said something to him. So I acknowledge that there's a little bit of truth in this view he has of me as authoritarian. I acknowledge it. And, well, he feels relieved by that. He's got an analyst who can be honest and admit these things. But now I go on and I say, but look at the mountain you made out of this molehill. Okay? Look what you did with this legitimate similarity between me and your authoritarian father. Well, man, you made such a big deal out of this small truth. Okay, that's good analytic work. We tell the truth, we acknowledge, but then we analyze what the patient made of this in his mind. Okay, then to complicate matters more. And this is Melanie Klein, and actually Freud actually explicitly acknowledged Melanie Klein's point here, accepted her point. She's saying, yeah, transference is this displacement of the patient's image of a past figure, like his father, a displacement of that image onto someone in the present, That's all true, she says, but remember that the patient's image of the past person might itself be highly distorted. It's not just that he's distorting his image of you by seeing you as if you're someone from his past. The image he has of the past person is already distorted. Okay, so I meet these guys and they all tell me how castrating their fathers were. They had castrating fathers. Well into the analysis, we may discover that the father really wasn't very castrating at all, but the patient was castrating. The patient wanted to castrate his dad. The patient was projecting his own castrative tendencies onto his father, thus distorting his image of his father. This is built right into the highly Oedipal story, Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack's father is gone. He's living with his mother. They need milk for the cow or something. The mother gives him some money to go to the store. Oh no, gives him money to go to the store to buy something needed. And he comes home with beans. And the mother's upset. She throws the beans out the window and they grow in the ground and a big beanstalk goes up and Jack climbs up. He climbs up and up at the top, the giant is living up there. And the giant has a magic harp and a hen that lays golden eggs and something else. I forget what the third thing is. Freud says 3. The number 3 indicates penis and 2 testicles. I don't know about that. It's a curious idea, maybe. But anyway, the giant has 3 very valuable things. A hen that lays golden eggs, a magic harp, something else, I forget. Jack wants to steal them from the giant. He's a thief. He wants to castrate the giant by taking away his hen that lays the golden eggs and the harp, blah, blah, blah. So he steals all of this stuff from the father giant, castrates him, and he's running away with the goods, the stolen goods, and the giant is after him. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. And the giant's wife is on Jack's side, and she offers to open up her oven and let him climb in and hide. Mother's gonna let him come into my oven and hide from my husband. That's pretty suggestive. That's pretty seductive. She's gonna open herself up and let him in while he steals her husband's penis. So anyway, you can go to the fairy tales and read the rest of the story. Giant's after him. He's hurrying down the beanstalk. Just as he gets the ground before the giant comes, his real mother brings an axe. You think the idea of the castration complex is fanciful and nonsense. It isn't. Here's in the fairy tale, mother hands him an axe to chop down the beanstalk. We have much of Freudian theory in that one story. The Oedipal competition, the wish to steal from the father. It's interesting that mother is helping do the castration. That's a wish. Okay. So what was the original point? The boy who thinks he's got a castrating father might actually want to be castrating his father. And he may be projecting his own castrative wishes onto the father. Now, look, there are castrating fathers. So, but when a patient gives you an image of a castrating father, you don't really know. For some years in the work, you don't know who's the castrator. Is it the father or is it the patient? The trouble with most psychotherapists in the world today. Oh, James Grotstein came to Toronto and he said that. He said the trouble with psychoanalysts is they believe their patients. We shouldn't believe our patients and we shouldn't disbelieve them. It's like with children. Can you believe children? No. But you have to think that maybe it could be true. You have to investigate because kid comes home from school and tells you some story about a teacher who is touching him inappropriately. Do you believe that or do you dismiss it? You should do neither. You should go and find out what's going on. But you can't just believe the kid. My son, he and I had been playing Lara Croft Tomb Raider on a computer game. And he comes home from school and he said as he was walking down Poplar Plains Road, he ran into Lara Croft. And she invited him into her house, and there were like trampolines and ropes, and he had a fantastic time. And I look at him and I'm, Nick, that's a fantasy, right? No, Dad, it's true. Well, wasn't true. It was a fantasy. So, look, it's very common in analysis. The patient comes in and says, look, the truth about me is I had a wonderful mother, but my father was an abusive authoritarian. 3 years later in the analysis, mother isn't looking nearly so good. Father's looking maybe not quite so bad. Things shift. The patient's view of his family shifts in the course of the analysis. Sometimes things shift from good to bad. I mean, they come in with, oh, I had a wonderful childhood. Oh, yeah, 3 years later, it doesn't look so wonderful. Sometimes it works the other way. They come in and they tell you everything was terrible, both parents were, and then it turns out not so much. Things change, things shift. Part of the analytic process. Okay, so transference can lead to distortion of the present person by putting onto them an image of someone from the past. But remember, that image of the someone from the past can be highly distorted itself. We have no idea what the patient's childhood was like. They come in and they tell us a story. And you must listen and take it seriously, but don't believe it, because it may turn out to be highly distorted. Okay. In our clinical work, excuse me. I've trained as a Freudian, but I then added Melanie Klein. I followed the Freudian and then the Kleinian development of Freud's. If I had to attach a label to myself, I would call myself a Kleinian Freudian. I remain a Freudian, but I've moved on and accepted much of Melanie Klein's extensions. I suppose there's some revision, but there's a lot of extension of Freud by Mrs. Klein. She gives us this model of the mind that has two positions, PS and D, the paranoid-schizoid position, which is the more primitive, and then the depressive reparative position, a more advanced position. The baby enters first into the paranoid-schizoid position. Schizoid meaning splitting. It's not the same thing as schizoid personality disorder. No. It just means everything is split, all good, all bad, idealization, devaluation. And then projection. You could project the bad out and hold the good, or you could project the good out and hold the bad. these two things have to be kept separate, because if you allow the good and the bad to come together, the bad may destroy the good. So you keep them separate in separate compartments. And that way of living with splitting and projection is the paranoid-schizoid position. And normally, as the months go by, the child begins to move towards the depressive reparative position, which is ambivalence. He begins to be able to hold both the good and the bad. He begins to be able to see people as whole, and he begins to see himself as whole. He can acknowledge his badness, at the same time remember his goodness. This is a much more mature position. His reality testing is much more accurate. Okay, some people get stuck and they live much of their lives in the paranoid-schizoid position. Those are borderline and psychotic people. Even the most advanced neurotic sometimes regresses into the paranoid-schizoid position. Everybody has the paranoid-schizoid position as a layer of the mind that we frequently visit. We talk about having bad moods. Well, what is the bad mood? Mood, it's just a regression, a temporary regression in a neurotic. He mostly lives in the depressive reparative position, but every once in a while he regresses. He doesn't sleep well, has a little spat with his wife, whatever. He's off. He's not having a good day. He's grumpy. He's irritable. Feels a bit persecuted. Well, he's regressed into the paranoid-schizoid position, but most of the time he lives in D. That's neurosis. Okay, this is diagnostic. This is the first thing I want to know about a new patient. When they see me for the first time, I'm trying to figure out, who is this person? Are they living mainly in PS, or are they living mainly in D? Because that's going to tell me what kind of therapy this is going to be. Am I going to have to do kung fu with this patient? Is this patient going to be challenging me and pouncing on me in every session, angry at me, railing at me? Am I going to have to be walking on eggs during this whole session, this whole treatment with this person? Are they going to be either making me a god or a devil? Is that what it's going to be? Look, I'm 81 years old. I'm half blind. Do I want to do that? The answer is no, I don't want to do that. I will not work with these people anymore. I will work with psychotics. I like psychotics. But I will not work with borderlines. It's too hard. This is pretty much true around the world. The older established analysts, we've got a practice. We don't need the patients. We're making good money already. I can say no to that borderline. Oh, I've got a young candidate looking for a patient. I'll pass it on to him. It's hard work with borderlines. They're constantly splitting and challenging. It's like they make you feel like you're trying to get the therapy off the ground. You're trying to get the therapy started, but there's quarreling about the time. There's quarreling about the fee. There's quarreling about whether it should be in the chair or should it be on the couch. You think, oh, we have to solve all of these problems. And once we get that all set up, the frame of the therapy is established, then the therapy can start. Well, the therapy never starts because the frame never gets established. Why? Because these borderline patients can't stand the frame. They're like prisoners who take that metal cup and they run it up and down the bars all the time. They won't settle down into the therapy. Therapy never gets going, really. Ugh. Okay, so I want to know, is this patient living mostly in PS or in D? Okay, now let's apply this to transference. There is an erotic transference And Freud wrote a whole paper on the dynamics of the erotic transference. But Freud is talking there mostly about neurotics, people in the depressive reparative position who fall in love with the analyst. By erotic, he means falling in love. He means it's from the heart. She's not stripping in the session. She's not chasing the analyst around the couch. She's not hiding in the bushes outside the analyst's house in order to catch a glimpse of him in his sexy little running shorts while he goes for his morning run. Sorry, I have to turn this off. That's the erotized transference. I'm talking about two kinds of transference, erotic and erotized. Erotic is in D, depressive reparative position, neurotic, erotic transference. But then there's the erotized transference. This patient is borderline in the paranoid-schizoid position. Okay, so she or he is out to literally seduce the analyst. You see, it's the difference between the symbolic and the concrete. Hannah Siegel, one of Melanie Klein's close associates, distinguishes symbolic representation from symbolic equation. In symbolic representation, it's like a simile. You see that your analyst is like your mother. But you don't think that the analyst is your mother, literally. You know that it's pretend. You know that it is as if. In the depressive reparative position, you know it's as if. You don't take it literally. So if the erotic transference is, it's quiet. She's quietly in love with her analyst. She may confess it. She may admit that she's having these romantic feelings, but she's not getting off the couch. She's not demanding that she sit in his lap. She's not demanding that they go for walks together in the garden instead of staying in the office on the couch, you know. It's a tender love. Whereas the erotized transference, well, we could be fucking on this couch. We've got privacy for 50 minutes in here. I'll be quiet. So it's concrete. It's acting out. Okay, erotized versus erotic. It's the same thing in the negative transference. There are two levels of a negative transference. The neurotic, on the level of D, is feeling angry at his analyst for this or that reason, but he's not punching the analyst in the face. He's not puncturing the tires on the analyst's automobile or keying the side of the car. So that's the borderline patient is inclined to act out. And he's taking things very literally and concretely. Now, I'm putting this in fairly extreme terms to illustrate the difference, but of course it's a continuum. It's a continuum from the very clearly symbolic to the very clearly concrete. But obviously there are middle points on this continuum. But it's very important to understand the difference between the erotic transference, which is about love, and the erotized transference, which is about sex concretely and in kind of invasively. It's a loss of boundaries. Yeah, the neurotic transference maintains boundaries. Yeah. Okay. there's a whole conference around the concept of the transference neurosis. How are we doing time-wise, Dwayne?
We've still got 32 minutes, and
Okay, we want to leave time for discussion, right? So I should draw things to a close in a minute or two?
however you're feeling, I think there are, I certainly have some questions. I think I see one or two in the chat, so perhaps there may be already quite a few questions.
Okay, well then I'll go for no more than maybe another 5 or 10 minutes.
Great, thank you.
Then we can discuss. Okay, so I think we should cover the concept of we're talking about transference. We should talk about the concept of the transference neurosis. Classical Freudians make a big distinction between what they call floating transferences and the transference neurosis, which is a different kettle of fish. As I said, transference is everywhere. You have a transference to your accountant, to your dentist, to the person who helps clean your house, whatever. There's always transference. And at the beginning of analysis, there's transference from the get-go. You don't have to wait. The patient's formed a transference if they hear the outgoing message on your answering machine. In my case, patients come to me, they've already got a whole bunch of transference because they've been on my YouTube channel. Which that's why some colleagues think I shouldn't have a YouTube channel. I don't agree. It's grist for the mill. The patient's going to form some kind of transference anyway. We analyze it. But those are floating transferences. They're there, they come and they go, and they're all over the place. So there's no shortage of transference. There never is. But the transference neurosis is something else. In a neurotic patient, if they're coming to the analyst, say 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, usually within a year of coming that often, a transference neurosis will start to appear. So what does that look like? And remember, I'm talking here about neurotics. They come with issues. They've got a compulsion to do rituals, wash their hands too often, turn all the elements on the stove, turn all the elements off, to repeat whatever. That's obsessional. They have various hysterical bodily complaints when there's really nothing medically wrong with them. Yeah, whatever. They come with symptoms. They come with symptoms that are bugging them, and that's why they're coming. They want to get rid of those bloody symptoms. Or maybe like the guy who came after the third woman cheated on him. He began to wonder, maybe I'm doing something. 3 in a row, 3 wives in a row have cheated on me. Gee, do I play? So he comes. And then like after a few months, he's got to go to Europe on business. And he's telling me, he knows that Jane, his partner, she gets lonely when he's away. So he calls up one of his buddies and he says, I'm gone for a couple of weeks and Jane gets kind of lonely. It'd be great if you, maybe took her to a movie or to dinner. And of course, he comes back from Europe and Jane has moved in with his buddy. And it's happened again. Okay, he set it up. So unconsciously, he's captured by this story of the unfaithful woman. And of course, he unconsciously picks women who are likely to be unfaithful. It's like a casting director, He goes to a party and there are 20 women and he talks to them and he comes home with this one because unconsciously he sees that she's the type who would cheat on him. And then he behaves in ways that would encourage her to ditch him. It's all unconsciously set up, and he plays out this drama over and over again. Anyway, with a neurotic patient, between 6 months and a year or a year and a half of coming to the analysis, something starts happening between him and me or her and me. It's not just this transference or that transference. there's a central story is starting to be developed between me and the patient. And it's an old story. And it's starting to happen here. But it's diagnostic that it takes almost a year for that to start happening. The patient is no longer complaining about their symptoms. They've lost interest in their symptoms. They've got a new symptom. It's called psychoanalysis. They're obsessed with the analyst. They're either falling into hate with him, or they're falling into love with him. They live for their analysis. That's transference neurosis. Classical analysts see this as the point of psychoanalysis. It has to be, it's dangerous. It can go off the rails. It can regress into a transference psychosis. If the patient is still working, even though they're in a transference neurosis and it's on the level of D, that element of as if is still there, and they can talk about what's going on and analyze it, as long as it remains on the level of D. Okay, but sometimes it regresses. Sometimes it becomes, sometimes a male analyst and a male patient will get into a fist fight, throwing punches at each other. It's regressed into a transference psychosis at that point. The patient may have a psychotic break and feel that the analyst is the evil persecutor who's plotting against him and trying to destroy his mind. And the analyst can become psychotic in a psychotic countertransference. We would have to do a whole other lecture on countertransference. We can't go into that too much today. But if any patient who develops a transference neurosis, the analyst will develop a countertransference neurosis. If the patient develops a transference psychosis, the analyst will develop a countertransference psychosis to some degree. That's the purpose of the training analysis, to keep that minimal. But it's not rare. It's not rare for patients to become psychotic in the analysis and the analyst to become a little crazy too. They kind of go crazy together. It goes off the tracks, like that thing in Portugal. Anyway, okay, now it's controversial. Critics of psychoanalysis see this. We in classical analysts invite the development of a transference neurosis. That's why we put the patient on the couch. That's why the room is a little bit dim. That's why the patient comes so often. That's why the analyst is fairly quiet. We want patients to regress, to get in touch with their internal world. Now, of course, this has to be qualified. Some patients who come are wrapped too tight. We want them to unravel. So we have them come often. We're silent. They're on the couch. They're wrapped too tight. We need them to unravel a bit. The problem is some patients come wrapped too loose. We don't want them to unravel. They're already unraveled. So we don't put them on the couch. We don't see them so often. We talk more. We keep them reality oriented because they're in danger of losing reality already. That's very diagnostic, you know. That only comes with experience. This patient, I've never met them. They come into my office. Is this person wrapped too tight? Is this person wrapped too loose? What kind of therapy am I going to do with this person? Anyway, many analysts turned away from the idea of the transference neurosis. They decided it's too dangerous, you know, but Freud defends it. Freud says, look, they allow chemists to possess dangerously explosive chemicals, to work with these dangerous chemicals in their laboratory for science. Therefore, analysts should likewise be allowed to work with these dangerous materials and methods. But a lot of analysts, including Freud himself, over time, they seem to pull back a little bit from the emphasis on the necessity to develop a full-blown transference neurosis, because I guess they saw that in inviting that, in evoking that, they were sometimes evoking transference psychosis. So over time, many analysts have turned away from this. I think most relational psychoanalysts have turned away from this. Self-psychologists have turned away from this. There are still classical Freudians and Kleinians who have not turned away from this. That's why the Kleinians in England, they see their patients 5 times a week. And they're all about evoking the transference neurosis, despite the risk of the transference psychosis. Because they argue that it's taken many years, sometimes decades, for the patient's personality to have formed and become deformed. And if you want to change a person on the level, not just of surface habits, but you want to change a person's structure, psychic structure, there has to be this deep regression called the transference neurosis. Otherwise, you're not going to change the person on the deep level that you wish to change them. And they wish to be changed. So this is a controversy, and it has to do with what school of thought you come to identify with. I mean, from a classical Freudian or Kleinian point of view, much of the psychotherapy being practiced in the world today is not psychoanalysis. It may be psychoanalytically informed psychotherapy. The patients are sitting, not lying down. The patients are coming once a week instead of 5 times a week, or even 2 times a week. I mean, the more sessions per week, the more likely you're going to get deeper and get into transference and transference neurosis. And some schools of thought don't want to get into those deep waters. So they keep it light, once a week, sitting across from each other. This is not psychoanalysis. At best, this is psychoanalytically informed psychotherapy. Okay. So there's transference, but then there's the transference neurosis. Well, my final point will be about focusing on the transference as opposed to focusing on extra-transference relationships. And this kind of overlaps with what I just was saying. The classical Freudians and Kleinians, they really want to be working in the transference, specifically in the transference neurosis. And they devalue extra-transference relationships. Like if the patient, I'm seeing the patient, it becomes about what's going on between him and me. I'm not really concerned about him and his wife or him and his kids. Any talk I have with him about other people in his life, that's extra transference work. And that is devalued by really classical Freudians and Kleinians. The essence of analysis is about here and now and you and me. And look what you're doing. Look how you're reacting. Where did that come from? What are you going to do about that? Okay, we're not focusing on patterns so much being enacted in his marriage. We're not marital therapists. And besides, what do we know about their marriage? Nothing. It's all hearsay. Certain states in the US are putting in legislation that if an analyst says something diagnostic about a patient's husband or wife, they lose their license to practice because that's malpractice. My patient's wife is not my patient. I've never met her. Quite right. Do I have to say anything about her? All I have are his reports about her, which may be highly distorted. I'm in no position to say anything about her husband. That's none of my business. What my business is, what she brings to me. Okay, that's working in the transference as opposed to extra-transference. Now, I have to say, I'm not completely fanatic about this. I think we sometimes do give extra-transference interpretations. We see a pattern being played out in the marriage, and it's very similar to what was played out with the mother or the father, whatever. And we talk about that. That's extra-transference work, and it's often helpful. It's often useful, as long as the analyst remembers that he's never met this person that his patient is playing some pattern out with. Okay. I think maybe we should hold it here. Okay, Dwayne. Any questions?
Abdullah, are you handling the question and answer period? Abdullah?
Is he muted?
Perhaps he's muted. Well, maybe if it's okay, while he's sorting that out, may I ask you?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, anyone would like to go? Okay. It's Dan. So please, Dan.
Okay. I do see some questions also in the chat here. Um, uh, Don, thank you so much for this incredible masterclass in transference. It went a little deeper than the video that some of us watched before coming today. And, I've got all these notes here. So you've put me to work, which maybe is a type of transference, a transference to work, which is an interesting type of transference if it is such a thing. But I have, I think, if I may, four very precise questions, and I'd just like you to take your pick from it, if that's okay. What
Sure.
do you like from the question? The first question, very simply, is I think I heard you say maybe you didn't mean it uh, quite as I heard it. Neurotics are more evolved, and I think this idea comes from a notion of splitting. And I wonder if we can think of a certain type of psychosis without splitting. Number two is the sibling transference. I'm thinking of Abel and Cain. Of course, there was a lot of, I'm wondering if there's a sibling transference is not without a mother or father transference, by which I mean, of course, Abel and Cain were fighting over a certain, well, we know what they were fighting over, maybe the
Yeah.
love of God or something like this. And I wonder if it can be located, if so. I understand it's a different beast, but I wonder if if we can say it's not without. The third question is about transference. I love this idea of distortion in the present, distortion of the past, memory.
Yeah.
But I was thinking you used the word displacement and distortion and metaphor even. And it
Yeah.
made me think, of this equivocation that sometimes people point that the interpretation of dreams also means not interpreting dreams, but dreams as their own interpretation. In some sense, I wonder what the relationship is between distortion, displacement, metaphor, and the transference and interpretation as such. And the final question is borderline transference. You said it's quite literal, so it's not as if. So how
Yeah.
can we speak of a borderline transference that's still distortion if the definition of transference is distortion? So whose distortion, I suppose, is the question. So those are my four big questions. Thank you.
Well, let's start. They're all great questions. So let's start with the last one. Yeah, it's distortion, but it's how the distortion is experienced. You can experience distortion in PS is different from distortion in D. Um, and it's the difference between symbolic equation, which is PS, and symbolic representation, which is D. So in a neurotic transference, there will be some distortion, but the patient will retain a sense of as if. So he has a sense that in seeing you as his authoritarian father, he's distorting a bit. He, on some level, he knows you're not his authoritarian father. He knows he's exaggerating your authoritarianism. He knows things are matters of degree. Okay, but if he's borderline, he loses that sense of as if to some degree. I mean, it's not either or. You're either borderline or you're neurotic. No, it's a continuum, and people flux, they move. When I regress into PS, I'm looking and being borderline for a few hours or days until I recover myself and move back to a much greater degree into D. So things are more or less. So distortion is more or less. Neurotics distort, but they do so less. And when they're distorting, they're not entirely losing the as if. It's not nearly as concrete. So that's all I can say really about that one. Now you asked three other questions. Help me, remind me about the other three questions. They'll come back to me if you just give me a hint.
Yeah, maybe the question of neurotics as a maybe slightly more evolved or easier to work with because of there's less splitting. I wonder if you can I mean, for example, this is an obvious difference between, say, a Kleinian and a Lacanian framework. Perhaps like the idea of a psychotic position or less defined by splitting in the Lacanian orientation than a particular
Okay, well, I can't address Lacan. I mean, I studied Lacan thoroughly for 4 or 5 years. I then stopped. I found it way too intellectualized. In my second book, 2018, there's a big chapter called Lacanian Theory, Appreciation and Critique. I think the early Lacan, at least before he went crazy, he had some interesting things to say. His concept of the mirror stage, I find very valuable. But I've never been able to accept this Lacanian idea of the four structures of the mind, and you can't change the structure. You can change your way of inhabiting the structure, but if you have psychotic structure, you're just going to have psychotic structure. If you've got perverse structure, that's just an unchangeable. No, that's not correct. People are more complicated than that, and people change over time. So I don't accept that aspect of Lacanian theory. The role of splitting. I mean, everybody splits. And in fact, I have a colleague who wrote a paper called In Defense of Splitting. He's a historian. He said, if we didn't split, we wouldn't have had workers willing to club cops over the head with steel pipes in order to form a union, in order to get unemployment insurance, in order to get socialized health care. Hitler would have won the war because no one would be able to split enough to put a bullet in the head of Nazis. In other words, he's saying that our field has completely failed to distinguish. It's made splitting all bad, which is splitting. We've split over splitting. We've made it all bad. No, there's good splitting. There is adaptive splitting as opposed to maladaptive. You got to sort out the poisonous berries from the edible ones. Okay. So everybody splits. It's a good thing we can split. We wouldn't be able to focus. We wouldn't be able to commit. You could say that, the average liberal, small L liberal, has an incapacity to split. They see all sides of every issue, which sounds like a good thing, but it could be paralyzing. At a certain point, one has to stop seeing all sides of everything, and sometimes one has to pick up one's gun. I don't know whether you see it or not, but as soon as Trump started talking about tariffs and Canada as the 51st state, I chose as my avatar on various things. It's a picture of a Canadian beaver, with the big teeth, and he's wearing like a World War I soldier's metal helmet, and there's a Canadian flag in the middle of his helmet, and he's holding an old-fashioned World War gun. And behind him, you see the trees and the forests. And so that's my avatar. Proud Canadian. If I had to pick up a gun to prevent MAGA from coming over the border or attempting to redraw it, I would have. I'm a little old for that at 81, but nevertheless, you could say that's a little PS. We need some of the elements of PS. Some elements of PS are well, look, falling in love. You would never fall in love if you lived your whole life in the mature, neurotic, depressive position. You wouldn't fall in love because falling in love is going mad. For 6 months, she's a goddess. And who would want a life without that? My God, I certainly wouldn't want a life without that. That's like one of the best highs a person can experience in their life is to be madly in love, especially if it's reciprocated. Wow, those chemicals. That happens in PS. That's a trip to PS. It settles down. The in love phase settles down, and we move into the phase of the work of loving in the depressive reparative. I'm now having to do the work of loving her, warts and all. I don't know. That's the best I can do to that question, Dwayne.
Thank you so much. Abdullah?
Yeah. So if anyone want to ask any question, there is two questions in the chat. I missed the first one. No. Yeah. How to do we tell client that you have made a big giant out of this move? Isn't that transference part of the problem client is coming to us for? Also, at what time in analysis do we decide to reveal that truth? It's a question by Mr. Mesa.
Sorry, I need that clarified before I can answer. I'm not quite getting the question.
I'm reading it
Hello.
again. Yeah,
Yeah.
please, Mr.
Yeah,
Mesa.
hello. Yeah, this is Romessa, actually. I put up that question when you were explaining the part where you said that we should tell the client or patient that this is the transference you are having on me, right? I'm not your father. Yeah, I'm not your mother. Or maybe the sibling transference. So, at what time in analysis do we actually reveal? And also, isn't that transferent the part of the problem, the whole problem with which the client is coming to us for? That's what I wanted to know. Because just putting it up upfront on the face of client, just right there, wouldn't that be, letting them to be in that shock, or maybe it could be end of the analysis, just the way
Letting,
you had
sorry,
another example.
letting them be in what?
In that shock, like, just having already they are having transference on to analysis, right? Yeah, or to on the analyst per se.
Yes.
But then again, revealing that directly upfront on their face, wouldn't that be an end of analysis then and there, instead of just at least going building that rapport and going with the analysis?
I would really like to answer your question, but it's still not quite clear. Dwayne, can you help? Do you have a sense of what she's asking so that I can answer?
I think it's a question relating to how to guide, in my interpretation, and forgive me, it's just my interpretation, how to reveal that this is transference to a patient and when it's opportune to do so would be my reading of the question. I hope that's fair.
Okay, well, I don't know whether I'm really addressing the issue, but let me say, Freud's paper on the erotic transference is really a very fascinating paper. I respect him so much for what happened in the middle of that. He changes his mind in the middle of the paper, and he's honest enough to let it stand. The first half of the of the paper, he's telling the patient, and he's advising colleagues to tell the patient that you think you're in love with me, but this is just transference. This isn't real love. This is a transference from when you were a little girl and you were in love with daddy, and you got me confused with daddy, and this is part of your problem, and we need to analyze this so that you will see that it is not real. And that's the analysis. Now, a lot of people got stuck on that idea, and they didn't appreciate what then Freud does as he approaches the end of the paper. He says, but wait a minute. He's thinking as he's writing. He says, wait a minute, I've been telling you a lie. What I've been saying is not true. This patient's love for me is transference. But so all love is transference, Freud says. The love of the analyst is fundamentally not different than the love of a man outside the therapy that you might marry. Love is transference, whether it's love of the analyst or love of somebody else. Love is transference. Freud, he says in the paper, it's time for me to get honest, he says. So this idea of saying, deconstruct these feelings because they're not real, that doesn't make any sense to say that to the patient. This is as real as any love. So we don't send it away, we analyze it. We understand the elements of it. We talk about it. But we don't say this is unreal. It's as real as any love. This is a brilliant paper by Sigmund Freud that shows what a great thinker he is. He can grow out of one point of view and say, oh, that's wrong. I'm not being honest. Now I'm going to be honest. He can do that in the course of one paper. That's a great thinker. You don't run into many thinkers like that. He does that at several points during his career. Like up until 1926, he thought that repression caused anxiety. In 1926, he announces to the world, oops, I got it backwards. Anxiety causes repression. He admits that for many, many years, he had it backwards. Okay? Again, that's a sign of a great thinker.
Thank you, Don. Are you comfortable going for another maybe 10 to 15 minutes? Because I think, are you okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Yeah, I have something at I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's very kind of you. Because I do see that a lot of questions are coming in. Um, I think you're speaking about the negation paper by Freud, um, with the anxiety causes repression. I think I see a question from Hajra. Hajra, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Dawn, first of all, thank you so much. It was very insightful for me.
Thank you.
And I have a question, but more of like I'm confused about something that I had been reading. I had
Okay.
been reading about Alice Miller, the
Oh,
drama
yes.
of the child.
Hmm.
So when you were telling me about one of your analysis with that guy who had like he was jealous of his sibling and the analysis was over because you tried something and you became that person who knew way too much for him.
Hmm.
I was just thinking that does it become about the gifted child? Um, like I couldn't understand what sort of the transference was being played in the room.
Hmm.
What was the counter transference there for you? And what were you transferring there with that client?
Okay. I've never, I read Alice Miller many years ago, and I never quite understood. I mean, that was the title of the book, and I never could really understand what she was saying because she did not seem to be speaking very much about the gifted child. She was speaking about trauma and children
Uh,
who've been traumatized.
there was this
Um,
one chapter.
Go ahead.
Um, There was this one chapter, the therapist's history, that talked about how gifted kids learn to read their parents to earn
Yes.
love and how they can show up in therapy with clients seeking approval or therapists unconsciously looking for validation. So, how do
Right.
we make that point, that distinction, if it is our transference or the client's transference that is coming into play?
Say that again, the last part. How do we determine what?
How do we make that distinction? For
Yeah.
example, in your case, you understood it later that you became the brother for him, the brother that he was very
Yes.
jealous of. So,
Yes.
how do we make that distinction if it was our transference that was coming into play or it was client's transference that we were working with?
I wasn't thinking of that as my transference. That was his transference. He then transferred the image of his hated brother onto me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's an interesting element to this story. I don't think it quite fits what you're getting at or trying to get at, but um, I I took the case to a senior colleague
Mm-hmm.
to consult, and she asked me, "Why are you only seeing him 3 times and not 4 times a week?"
Mm-hmm.
And she made me aware that I was intimidated about asking him to come 4 times. I knew what he would say. He would scoff. He would say, "Oh, you're just a money grubbing analyst. You want to suck more money out of me, blah, blah." So I wasn't asking him to come 4 times, even though I agreed with her that he really should be coming 4 times. She helped me begin to realize how, in my work with him, I was feeling like the intimidated child, and
Mm-hmm.
he was the intimidating one. Um, so look, his story, let's just talk about the story in his mind. His story is between the superior older brother and the inferior younger brother. He watched as a boy, he loved this cartoon. The big animal is chasing the little animal, and the little animal decides to sort of outsmart the big animal by running way out on the dock out into the lake. He runs fast to the very end of the dock, and then he he's going to duck down, and the big animal is going to go right into the water. So, he decides he'll play this out with his brother. He gets the brother chasing him, and well, needless to say, he winds up in the water, not the brother. Okay, so we have these two roles, the intimidator and the intimidated. And I'm sitting there thinking, I must not act like the intimidating brother. But I was not conscious that I was the intimidated younger brother. I was busy thinking of myself as potentially the intimidating older brother, and I'm guarding against playing that out. But all along, I was occupying the role of the intimidated younger brother, but I was unconscious of that. So I don't know that I'm really answering your question. Well, you were saying what's my transference? I'm not talking about my transference. I'm talking about my identification, right?
You are actually answering my question because I don't know about you, but as a therapist, it's always my struggle because I become like usually I work with trauma. So the first safety we get is from our parents, like the primary caregivers.
Yeah.
So I see if the person is lacking that, then I become the good mama in the picture always. That's where I was going with the question, and you are actually answering my question because I do get intimidated by my clients sometimes because I want them to win sometimes, at least in the room. And yes, you were answering my
Okay,
question.
good.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. It's good that you know that you have this bias, that you have a tendency to identify with the good mama. That makes it hard for you when the patient is not experiencing you as the good mama, but as the evil witch.
Hmm.
Um, anyway, these are the complexities. I was so focused on not being intimidating that I was blind to the fact that he was intimidating me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we have
Well, getting
my
that.
apologies, Petra.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question. Did you ask me something?
No, I was going to open it up unless you wanted to continue the dialogue. My apologies for interrupting.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the insightful question. Thank you.
So there are a lot of questions written in the chat, but I'm hoping somebody will raise. Yes, we have Abdullah Mirza. I'm making special mention of Abdullah, who's frequently involved in the circle. So happy you're here. Go ahead, Abdullah.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your talk. Yeah, my question was about, I guess I was wondering if you could say something about how we can understand transference in terms of time. You're talking about the father and then the mother and the brother transference, and so is it just because of the amount of time that we spend with them developing our long-term memories that we have that? And if so, if there's someone who is a non-family member, like a best friend, transfers from childhood, something like that, or
Sure.
maybe a, a malicious person that you're locked in, a prison cell for 20 years or something. And then the other half of the question was about all those short-term memories. Especially if you're living in a city, the majority of your interactions will be with people who, again, you might spend the majority of your daily emotional life interacting with people who you might not remember in the long term, but um, so I was wondering if you could say something about the short-term memories and all those people who we forget after a month or a day or so on.
Well, I would think that if the short term, if they're very casual relationships that we would forget after a day or so, that means they're not very emotionally salient, or they're not loaded with emotion. Therefore, probably much less likely to be played out. Well, I mean, look, no, let me revise that. You might meet and be with this person for 3 minutes and never see them again and never have seen them before, but during those 3 minutes, they beat the shit out of you and left you bleeding. Well, there's a good chance you'll transfer that because that's trauma. They traumatized you. Okay, so that's highly emotionally significant. You were terrified. Then comes anger. By the way, my critique of some of the people who work with trauma, they're so sympathetic to the traumatized victim, they fail to understand or remember, some of them, that trauma generates rage. It generates rage. And that rage that flows from your trauma can sometimes lead you to traumatize others. Many trauma victims turn the rage on themselves, and now they become abusers. They were victims, now they are abusers of themselves. They may not abuse others. They might, but it doesn't matter. If you abuse yourself, you're an abuser. And people who have been traumatized who come into analysis, they need to learn about how they are abusive. Sometimes it's absolutely horrible, the abuse that they do to themselves, having been abused. And sometimes it goes beyond themselves. It goes to the other people around them that they also abuse because they were abused. Well, so that's okay. That's an example of a person you've spent a few minutes with, and you may transfer that image of that violent abuser all over the place.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions. My apologies to all of you. We can't get to all of them, but I'll give the last question, if I may, I think I see Fatima Khan's hand up. Very interesting question, Fatima.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, as you mentioned, splitting, adaptive splitting and
Yes.
maladaptive splitting. What would
Yes.
be the thin line between recognizing each?
What's the biggest what? Say again.
What is the thin line
I can't hear.
between recognizing
It's breaking up. It's breaking up, so I can't really hear the question, I'm afraid.
I think I heard a bit of it, if I may. I think she's asking,
adaptive?
what is the line that separates adaptive from maladaptive splitting?
And
The
maladaptive
line,
splitting.
the line between them. Well, it's a matter of
Hello?
well, look, I need, first of all, whenever I speak about adaptive or maladaptive, I want to make it clear that I am not one of these people who defines mental health as adaptation to society. I reject that. Bertrand Russell once said, there are societies where the only place a decent person can be is in jail. America is rapidly turning into that society, in my opinion. R.D. Laing says, okay, there's a squadron of airplanes, but one plane is out of formation. On the other hand, the formation might be off course. The squadron might be off course. The one plane that's out of formation might be on course. Okay, so there are some societies where you do not want adaptation. So I'm not judging what's adaptive or what's maladaptive in terms of conformity. sometimes, well, one of my heroes is Edward Snowden, who blew the whistle and is stuck over there in Russia. So okay, but in what sense is it adaptive then? If you do something that is maladaptive to your adjustment to your society, how can that maladjustment to your society be adaptive? It may be adaptive, an adaptive maladaptation, an adaptive maladjustment. What's that about? Well, it's adaptive because you're in touch with your true self. You're in touch with your integrity. You're in touch with your authenticity. You're out of touch with the society that's trying to kill you or put you in jail. But you are in touch with your core values. And therefore, it's adaptive. That's what I mean by adaptive, as opposed to maladaptive. Maladaptive takes me away from my core self. In my work, the core self is attached to conscience. Conscience and true self are two sides of the same coin. So if I act in a way, and I'm not talking about the superego, the damn superego is a social construction, but the conscience is not a social construction. The conscience is a gift from God. The conscience is the vox Dei, the voice of God. The title of my first book, The Still Small Voice, comes from the Old Testament, the book of Kings. First came the thunder, but God was not in the thunder. And then came the fire, but God was not in the fire. Then came the still small voice. And the implication is God was in the still small voice of conscience. So that which brings us more in harmony with our conscience, which may be violation of the superego, because the superego and the conscience are rarely aligned. What is sin from the standpoint of the superego may be salvation from the standpoint of the conscience. So I'm not sure whether any of this is really addressing the question about the line.
It is.
Yeah, I hope it is.
I do have a follow-up question though. Then,
Sure.
how much of psychosis would then be a complete lack? I mean, I'm just assuming that conscience, we are equating it to character structure. So, how much of neurosis or psychosis could be halfway or complete loss of a character structure?
Loss of character structure. Are you talking about the degree to which neurosis or psychosis could reflect estrangement from conscience?
Yes.
Okay, if we formulate it that way, I can answer it. I think neurosis and psychosis always, by definition, reflect estrangement from conscience. The cure for both neurosis and psychosis is recovering and reordering one's life in line with conscience. That's the whole point of the therapy. Although psychoanalysts have been lying about this and denying it since the beginning. Psychoanalysts are saying, oh, we're not like religion, we are science. We don't make value judgments. We don't make moral judgments. We are neutral. This is all bullshit. Psychoanalysis is a value infused, not a value neutral discipline. From the beginning, our values are clear. We stand for life against death. We stand for love against hate. We stand for truth against lies. We are an ethical practice. And we are trying to help sinners find salvation. Most analysts hate this language, these words, because a lot of them had crazy religious homes crazy religion. But unfortunately, there were truths in those religions. There is a difference. So people who are neurotic or psychotic are morally messed up. They're morally lost. That's why they're crazy. What's the solution to craziness? Not being morally lost. Sorting oneself out morally. Because unless you sort yourself out morally, you cannot like yourself because you're a sinner. You're a cheater. You're a liar. How are you going to like yourself? You want to like yourself? Stop lying. Stop cheating. Stop being so damn selfish. Stop being so self-centered, i.e. narcissistic. To the extent that you are narcissistic, you can't really like yourself. Oh, and if you can't like yourself, you can never have peace. You can't have peace and sit just in the sun in your backyard and you can't be at peace in the world. I'm not saying anyone can be at peace in the world in any consistent way. The world doesn't allow such peace because there are wars and there is all of this garbage going on. But certainly neurotic and psychotic people have got a moral problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Peace right now to me seems like a beautiful lie. I want to thank
Well, nowadays, yeah. Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Carveth. I really appreciate this. This was an incredible event for us here in Pakistan. Maybe it'll be worth you knowing a little bit about your audience, which I think some people moved to other events that were happening in the last little bit, but we had about 55 plus people, a nice cross section from across Pakistan. I think I recognized a person here from maybe Africa, South Africa. So I see some representation a little bit outside of Pakistan. There were people from the circle, Pakistan Psychoanalytic Circle here, some folks from Habib University, from Lahore, from Islamabad, and even some students from my class at Aga Khan University. So I just wanted to mention that we had a very nice eclectic audience here. And of course, we've recorded this.
Can you send me the recording so I can put it up on my YouTube channel?
I'd be happy to do that. I'll send you.
That'd be great. Thank you, Dwayne. I'd appreciate it.
So thanks to you and to everybody here for establishing a space for us to think about these things and how we can work with them here in our context in Pakistan. Thank you, Dr. Carveth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All the best to you all.